Before beginning the Holy Rosary, I welcome you all in today's virtual Holy Rosary. In behalf of A Choir, we are extremely sorry for the delay. We are sorry for the delay for today's journey of Rosary due to some technical problems. Before beginning the Rosary, everyone needs to know the importance of Rosary. So a short introduction is about Rosary. The word Rosary comes from Latin and means a garland of roses. The rose being one of the flowers used to symbolize the Virgin Mary. And it was only in the year 1214, however, that the Church received the Rosary in its present form and according to the method we use today. It was given to the Church by Saint Dominic, who had received it from the Blessed Virgin as a means of converting sinners. I request all of you to keep your phones in silent mode. Let's make sign of the cross in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Day 3. Mary and the Blessed Trinity. Through the incarnation of our Lord in her immaculate womb, Mary, the daughter of God, the Father, is also the spouse of God, the Holy Spirit, and the Mother of God, the Son. We'll start the Rosary with a song. Oh, how we love Mary to praise you, honor your name, bless you always. You are the mother of Jesus Christ and mother of humankind. You're the glory of a race, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. On the third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From there he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Glorious mystery. The first glorious mystery, the resurrection. Christianity is the resurrection faith, where Jesus opened the door to salvation and eternal life. Therefore, we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in the newness of life. Lord my God, I pray for all those souls, all those people, those who are now thinking about suicide or killing themselves. Lord, be with them so that they can know the importance of the life. Help us, Lord, that in their mind your image can come, so that, Lord, they can fight with themselves that why you have given us the life. And Lord, some or the other, the person who are now thinking about the suicide, of that suicide, or having the suicidal tendency, some or the other, they will be guilty of their past things. Help them, Lord, that they can know that you have healed them. You have given them a new life today. They can realize the importance of life and how you have helped all of us to conquer the death and to have an eternal life. Help us, Lord, that those who are thinking of suicide, be with them, give them the strength that first they may think the importance of life about you and they can come out from it. Give them strength, Lord. For this I pray.
Mama, please intercede for this intention.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. O my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are in the most need of thy mercy. Blessed Lady, in you is our reward of hope. May all who venerate you experience your assistance and protection. Mary, seat of wisdom, pray for us.
Second glorious mystery, the Ascension. Dear Lord, please heal this world from corona pandemic and heal us spiritually, physically and emotionally. For this we pray, Mother Mary, to intercede for us. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy.
Blessed Lady, in you is our reward of hope. May all who venerate you experience our assistance and protection. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Third glorious mystery, the descent of the Holy Spirit. We plead before you, O Lord, through the intercession of Mary, as after a couple of weeks we will celebrate the feast of Pentecost. Grant us the grace to change from within, acknowledging our iniquities and preparing our mind, body, soul and spirit a dwelling place for the Holy Spirit. Our Father,
Who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are in the most need of thy mercy.
Amen. Blessed Lady, in you is our reward, O hope. May all who venerate you experience your assistance and protection. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Fourth glorious mystery, the Assumption. We pray for all those who strive for eternal life, that they may reach to eternal life. O Mother most holy, please pray that they may not get distracted or deviated from that path that leads to eternal life. O Mama Mary, please intercede for us. Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is thy fruit, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are in the most need of thy mercy.
Blessed Lady, in you is our reward of hope. May all who venerate you experience your assistance and protection. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Fifth glorious mystery, the crowning of Our Lady, Queen of Heaven. O Queen of Peace, when I think of peace, I think of a world without war and conflict. Mary, our Mother and our Lord's Mother, intercede for us so that we may have inner peace with God first, so that we will radiate that peace and create a peaceful world around us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus, forgive us our sins,
Save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who have most need of thy mercy.
Blessed Lady, in you is our reward of hope. May all who venerate you experience your assistance and protection. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us. Let's say together the Hail Holy Queen. Hail Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy, hail our life, our sweetness and our hope. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we send our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Turn them most graciously, advocate, into thine of mercy towards us. And after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. Amen.
Let us all kneel for the litany. Litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Christ, hear us.
Christ, graciously hear us.
God, the Father of heaven,
Have mercy on us.
God, the Son, Redeemer of the world,
Have mercy on us.
God, the Holy Spirit,
Have mercy on us.
Holy Trinity, one God.
Have mercy on us.
Your response will be, pray for us. Holy Mary,
Pray for us.
Holy Mother of God,
Pray for us.
Holy Virgin of Virgins,
Pray for us.
Mother of Christ,
Pray for us.
Mother of divine grace,
Pray for us.
Mother inviolate,
Pray for us.
Mother undefiled,
Pray for us.
Mother most pure,
Pray for us.
Mother most chaste,
Pray for us.
Mother most amiable,
Pray for us.
Mother most admirable,
Pray for us.
Mother of good counsel,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Creator,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Savior,
Pray for us.
Virgin most prudent,
Pray for us.
Virgin most venerable,
Pray for us.
Virgin most renowned,
Pray for us.
Virgin most powerful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most merciful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most faithful,
Pray for us.
Mirror of justice,
Pray for us.
Seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
cause of our joy,
Pray for us.
spiritual vessel,
Pray for us.
vessel of honor,
Pray for us.
singular vessel of devotion,
Pray for us.
mystical rose,
Pray for us.
Tower of David,
Pray for us.
Tower of ivory,
Pray for us.
House of gold,
Pray for us.
Ark of the covenant,
Pray for us.
Gate of heaven,
Pray for us.
Morning star,
Pray for us.
Health of the sick,
Pray for us.
Refuge of sinners,
Pray for us.
Comforter of the afflicted,
Pray for us.
Help of Christians,
Pray for us.
Queen of angels,
Pray for us.
Queen of patriarchs,
Pray for us.
Queen of prophets,
Pray for us.
Queen of apostles,
Pray for us.
Queen of martyrs,
Pray for us.
Queen of confessors,
Pray for us.
Queen of virgins,
Pray for us.
Queen of all saints,
Pray for us.
Queen conceived without original sin,
Pray for us.
Queen assumed into heaven,
Pray for us.
Queen of the most holy rosary,
Pray for us.
Queen of peace,
Pray for us.
Queen of family.
Pray for us.
Your response will be, spare us, O Lord. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world.
Spare us, O Lord.
Your response will be, graciously hear us, O Lord. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world.
Graciously hear us, O Lord.
Your response will be, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, who take away the sin of the world.
Have mercy on us,
Pray for us, O Holy Mother of God.
that we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ.
Let us pray.
Grant, we beseech thee, O Lord God, that we, thy servants, may enjoy perpetual health of mind and body, and by the glorious intercession of the Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, be delivered from present sorrow and enjoy eternal happiness through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Let's say the Memorare together. Remember,
O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen.
we'll say a special prayer which has been given by Pope Francis during this time of pandemic COVID-19. We'll say it together. We fly to your protection, O Holy Mother of God, in the present tragic situation when the whole world is prey to suffering and anxiety. We fly to you, Mother of God and our Mother, and seek refuge under your protection. Virgin Mary, turn your merciful eyes towards us amid this coronavirus pandemic. Comfort those who are distraught and mourn their loved ones who have died and at times are buried in a way that grieves them deeply. Be close to those who are concerned for their loved ones who are sick and who, in order to prevent the spread of the disease, cannot be close to them. Filled with hope the consequences for the economy and employment. Mother of God and our Mother, pray for us to God, the Father of mercies, that this great suffering may end and that hope and peace may dawn anew. Lead with your divine Son, as you did at Cana, so that the families of the sick and the victims to be comforted and their hearts be opened to confidence and trust. Protect those doctors, nurses, health workers, and volunteers who are on the front line of this emergency and are risking their lives to save others. Support their heroic effort and grant them strength, generosity, and continued help. Be close to those who assist the sick night and day, and to the priests who, in their pastoral concern and fidelity to the gospel, are trying to help and support everyone. Blessed Virgin, illumine the minds of men and women engaged in scientific research, that they may find effective solutions to overcome this virus. Support national leaders that with wisdom, solicitude, and generosity they may come to the aid of those lacking the basic necessities of life, and may devise social and economic solutions inspired by farsightedness and solidarity. Mary Most Holy, stir our consciences so that the enormous funds invested in developing and stockpiling arms will instead be spent on promoting effective research on how to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Beloved Mother, help us realize that we are all members of one great family, and to recognize the bond that unites us, so that in a spirit of fraternity and solidarity we can help to alleviate countless situations of poverty and need. Make us strong in faith, persevering in service, constant in prayer. Mary, consolation of the afflicted, embrace all your children in distress and pray that God will stretch out His powerful hand and free us from this terrible pandemic, so that life can speedily resume its normal course. To you who shine on our journey as a sign of salvation and hope, do we trust ourselves, O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. Amen. As I kneel before you, as I bow my head in prayer, take this day, make it yours, and fill me with your love. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Virgin Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Dominic, pray
Pray
for
for
us.
us.
Saint Jose Maria Escriva,
Pray for us.
Let's make sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you for joining us in this rosary, and we expect that you will be doing us till May 30th, and we will continue this with the Mass.
As we are preparing our altar, please enjoy the music, and we'll be soon back with the virtual Holy Mass.
friends. In behalf of Ace Choir, I welcome you to this virtual Holy Mass. This Mass was celebrated in the Archdiocese of Toronto by Father Thomas. Before beginning the Mass, I request all of you to keep your phones in silent mode. Thank you. Let's make sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's all rise for entrance hymn.
Welcome to the celebration of the Sunday TV Mass. Today is Vocation Sunday, which coincides with Good Shepherd Sunday and is the fourth Sunday in the Easter season. The first World Day of Prayer for Vocations was instituted by Pope Paul VI in 1963 during the Second Vatican Council. My name is Father Tomasz Skibiński. In his message about this Sunday, Pope Francis asks each one of us, as a member of Christ's Church, to pray on this day in particular and every day in the ordinary pastoral life of our communities to continue to promote vocations. The Holy Father reminds us that through prayer, the Church touches the hearts of the faithful and enables each person to discover with gratitude God's call in their lives, to find the courage to say yes to God, to overcome all weariness through faith in Christ, and to make of their lives a song of praise for God, for their brothers and sisters, and for the whole world. We thank the Daily TV Mass community for joining us in this week of Masses for Prayers for Vocations. Your prayers are a gift to all of God's people. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all.
And with your spirit.
Brothers and sisters, let us enter into this joyous celebration, and first of all, as always, ask the Lord for pardon and forgiveness for our sins, so that we may worthily celebrate these holy mysteries. I confess to Almighty God, and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have greatly sinned in my thoughts and in my words, in what I have done and in what I have failed to do, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. Therefore I ask, Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, all the angels and saints, and you, my brothers and sisters, to pray for me to the Lord our God. May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life. Amen.
Lord, have mercy on us all. 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 Christ, 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 have mercy on us all. Lord, 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 have mercy on us all. Glory be to the Father, glory be to the Son, glory be to the Spirit, all glory to our God. We praise you, we bless you, we give you thanks. We praise you for your glory. We praise you, we bless you, we worship you, O Lord our God. Glory be to the Father, glory be to the Son, glory be to the Spirit, all glory to our God. Lord Jesus Christ, Holy Son of God, you are one with the Father. Receive our prayer. Glory be to the Father. Glory be to the Son. Glory be to the Spirit. All glory to our God. You alone are the Holy One. You alone are the Lord. With the Holy Spirit, the glory of God. Glory be to the Father. Glory be to the Son. Glory be to the Spirit. All glory to our God.
Let us pray. Almighty ever-living God, lead us to a share in the joys of heaven, so that the humble flock may reach where the brave shepherd has gone before, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
In today's first reading, we will get to know that Peter says to people, "Repent and be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ." First reading. A reading from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, verses 14 and 36 to 41. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them.
Men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Therefore, let the entire house of Israel know with certainty that God has made him both Lord and Messiah, this Jesus whom you crucified. Now, when they heard this, they were cut to the heart and said to Peter and to the other apostles, Brothers, what should we do? Peter said to them, Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, so that your sins may be forgiven and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. For the promise is for you, for your children, and for all who are far away, everyone whom the Lord our God calls to him. And he testified with many other arguments and exhorted them, saying, Save yourselves from this corrupt generation. So those who welcomed his message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 persons were added. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
In today's second reading, we will get to know that how Christ has set an example for us by his suffering.
Second reading, 1 Peter chapter 2 verses 20 to 25. If you endure when you are beaten for doing wrong, what credit is that? But if you endure when you do right and suffer for it, you have God's approval. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When he was abused, he did not return abuse. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that, free from sins, we might live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed, for you were going astray like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Let's all rise for acclamation.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. I am the good shepherd, says the Lord. I know my sheep, and my own know me. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
In today's Gospel reading, we will hear that Jesus says, I am the gate for the sheep.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said, Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, Very truly I tell you, I am the gate of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The shepherd stands at the forefront and leads the herd. He is responsible for each of the sheep, and they listen to his voice and follow him. The fourth Sunday of Easter, also called the Good Shepherd Sunday, at the initiative of Paul VI, was instituted as the World Day of Prayer for Vocations, to pray in a unique way for those called to live a life of a priest, deacon, religious brother or sister, or a consecrated person. By vocation, we usually mean God's call to a specific way of life. Every calling is a great gift of God, a gift that is heard from the depth of one heart, regardless of age, culture, language, or ethnicity. God's election is always a mystery. He calls whom he wants and when he wants. The Good Shepherd Sunday is an opportunity to pray for vocations. Special moments of prayer and various initiatives are tirelessly organized on the diocesan and parish levels. It is not difficult to notice that in our time and age, more and more of the baptized have problems with discerning their call and living it out. This applies not only to the difficulties associated with making a decision for life, that is, the discovery of a specific calling for marriage, priesthood, or consecrated life, but above all the difficulties associated with the implementation of our first baptismal vocation, which is the universal call to holiness. It is often the liturgical life of the Church as a response to God's action in our life from which a true relationship with Christ is born, which is for many the moment of the calling. But we are also often looking for role models who live their life with Christ in a genuine and faithful way, which is attractive and makes us desire to do the same. We all know that we more often listen not to teachers, but to witnesses. The world does not really need people who are just preaching love. The world needs people who live love. Generally, the people listening to the same words coming from two different people right away understand the difference between a preacher who speaks well and a person who lives what he preaches. And the sheep know and recognize the voice of the true shepherd and follow him. We all need a deeper reflection and times of intimate silence to understand God's call and His will for each of us. The reflection on what we hear and acceptance of it with our whole heart and life. God's will accepted in this way will bear fruit and have concrete implications for our Christian life and for the life of the entire Church. Our concern should be to continually strengthen our relationship with Christ, the Good Shepherd, always and in all the circumstances of our lives, regardless of what might be happening around us. There is a story about two monks who read in a wise book about the existence of a place where earth meets heaven. They read there would be a door in the place they were looking for where they will be able just to knock, enter, and contemplate the face of God. They decided to find this place. They left the monastery and set off. They traveled the whole world and overcame many dangers. Finally, they reached the gate. They knocked with a trembling heart, and the door opened. The monks came in and they found themselves in their own cell, in their monastery. The gate to paradise is not far away. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, waits for me and for you within the reality of our life. We just need to recognize His voice, the only voice that saves. The Lord is always our shepherd, and so we should always be His sheep. Today's Sunday invites us to a special prayer for priests. Let us surround our priests with prayer and entrust their service to Mary, Mother of the Good Shepherd. Let us pray to the Lord of the harvest to send laborers to His harvest. And now let us stand up to profess together our faith. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, His only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. On the third day, he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of God, the Father Almighty. From there he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Amen. Let us offer to God our prayers. Let us pray especially for all those in the Daily TV Mass community that have asked to be included in our prayer intentions book. During this Easter season, the hope that comes from the risen Lord may strengthen those in our community suffering from physical or emotional difficulties. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
And for all men and women searching for their vocation in life, that God may give them the gift of understanding to discern their service in the Church as priests, deacons, or in consecrated life. and for the gift of courage to follow the voice of the Good Shepherd, we pray to the Lord. We ask you, Lord, that you welcome these prayers and all those that we have brought to you today. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Pray, brothers and sisters, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God, the Almighty Father.
May
May
the
the Lord
Lord
accept the sacrifice.
for the praise and glory of His name, for our good and the good of all His holy church.
Grant, we pray, O Lord, that we may always find delight in these Paschal mysteries, so that the renewal constantly at work within us may be the cause of our unending joy. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Lift up your hearts.
Lift them up to the
Let
Lord.
us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right and just.
It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation, at all times to acclaim you, O Lord, but in this time above all to laud you yet more gloriously when Christ our Passover has been sacrificed. He never ceases to offer himself for us, but defends us and ever pleads our cause before you. He is the sacrificial victim who dies no more, the Lamb once slain who lives forever. Therefore, overcome with paschal joy, every land, every people exalts in your praise, and even the heavenly powers with the angelic hosts sing together the unending hymn of your glory as they acclaim. You are indeed holy, O Lord, the fount of all holiness. Make holy, therefore, these gifts, we pray, by sending down your Spirit upon them like the dewfall, so that they may become for us the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. At the time he was betrayed and entered willingly into his passion, he took bread, and giving you thanks, broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you." In a similar way, when supper was ended, he took the chalice, and once more giving thanks, he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it. For this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me."
My Lord, my God.
The mystery of faith.
We proclaim your death, O Lord, and profess your resurrection until you come again.
Therefore, as we celebrate the memorial of his death and resurrection, we offer you, Lord, the bread of life and the chalice of salvation. giving thanks that you have held us worthy to be in your presence and minister to you. Humbly we pray that partaking of the body and blood of Christ, we may be gathered into one by the Holy Spirit. Remember, Lord, your church spread throughout the world, and bring her to the fullness of charity, together with Francis, our Pope, and Thomas, our Bishop, and all the clergy. Remember also our brothers and sisters who have fallen asleep in the hope of the resurrection, and all who have died in your mercy. Welcome them into the light of your face. Have mercy on us all, we pray, that with the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, with blessed Joseph, her spouse, with the blessed apostles, and all the saints who have pleased you throughout the ages, we may merit to be co-heirs to eternal life, and may praise and glorify you through your Son, Jesus Christ. Through him and with him and in him, O God Almighty Father, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor is yours forever and ever.
Amen.
At the Saviour's command, and formed by divine teaching, we dare to say, Deliver us, Lord, we pray, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our days, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin and safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope and the coming of our Saviour, Jesus Christ.
For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever.
Lord Jesus Christ, who said to your apostles, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you," look not on our sins, but on the faith of your church, and graciously grant her peace and unity in accordance with your will, who live and reign forever and ever.
Amen.
The peace of the Lord be with you always.
And with your spirit.
Let us offer each other the sign of peace.
Lamb of God,
You take away the sin of the world.
have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, grant us peace.
Behold the Lamb of God, behold him who takes away the sins of the world. Blessed are those called to the supper of the Lamb. Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed.
Since we cannot receive the Holy Communion now, let us remember our first Holy Communion and our best moment when we received the body and blood of Christ. Remembering that, let us partake in the spiritual communion by saying this prayer. Immaculate Queen of heaven and earth, Mother of God and mediator of every grace, I believe that your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained in the most holy sacrament. I love him above all things and long to receive him in my heart, since now I cannot receive him sacramentally. Be so good to place him spiritually in my soul and never permit me to be separated from him. Amen. I am the God that healeth thee. I am the Lord, your healer. Let us say the prayer after communion of St. Thomas Aquinas. I thank you, Lord, Almighty Father, everlasting God, for having me pleased through no merit of mine, but of your great mercy alone, to feed me, a sinner, and your unworthy servant, with the precious body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. I pray that this Holy Communion may not be for my judgment and condemnation, but for my pardon and salvation. Let this Holy Communion be to me an armor of faith and a shield of goodwill, a cleansing of all vices and a rooting out of all evil desires. May it increase love and patience, humility and obedience, and all virtues. May it be a firm defense against the evil designs of all my visible and invisible enemies, a perfect quieting of all the desires of soul and body. May this Holy Communion bring about a perfect union with you, the one true God, and at last enable me to reach eternal bliss when you will call me. I pray that you bring me, a sinner, to the indescribable feast, where you, with your Son and the Holy Spirit, are to your saints true light, full blessedness, everlasting joy, and perfect happiness, through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say prayer for priest of Saint Therese of Lisieux. O Jesus, eternal priest, keep your priests within the shelter of your sacred heart, where none may touch them. Keep unstained their anointed hands, which daily touch your sacred body. Keep unsullied their lips, daily purpled with your precious blood. Keep pure and unearthly their hearts, sealed with the sublime mark of the priesthood. Let your holy love surround them and shield them from the world's contagion. Bless their labors with abundant fruit, and may the souls to whom they minister be their joy and consolation, here and in heaven, the beautiful and everlasting crown. Amen.
Let us pray. Look upon your flock, kind shepherd, and be pleased to settle in eternal pastures the sheep you have redeemed by the precious blood of your Son, who lives and reigns forever and ever.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Let us go in peace.
Thanks be to God. Lord, we thank you for this day. Lord my God, we ask your help to so that we can accept the sufferings that is going on in our life or which are going to come. Lord, help us that we can understand what is suffering. And suffering is the starting point where we'll able to know the love, the meaning of love. Because of suffering, endurance will come in us. Help us, Lord, that happily we can accept the sufferings, the pain, and now and also in the coming days we may live love. For this we pray, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Let's say the Memorare together. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come. Before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but with thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. O Queen of Heaven, rejoice now. Alleluia. Rejoice, for he who merit no despair. Alleluia. He is risen as he foretold. Alleluia. Pray for us to the Father. Alleluia. Rejoice and be glad, O Virgin Mary. Alleluia. For the Lord has truly risen. Alleluia. Let us pray. O God, you deign to give joy to the world through the resurrection of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant, we beseech you, that through his mother, the Virgin Mary, we may obtain the joys of everlasting life. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Virgin Mary, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Saint Faustina, pray for us. Saint Jose Maria Scriba, pray for us. Let's make sign of the cross in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you, friends, for joining us in this virtual Holy Mass. Have a blessed week ahead. Stay safe and take precaution. Join us for the daily rosary, and we are doing the rosary at 5 o'clock. We are doing the Rosary at 5 o'clock in the evening. Thank you.